Well, it's hay fever season, tree pollen. And what's that got to do with transport? Absolutely nothing. But it does allow me to deploy that well-used Glasgow phrase, the snotters are tripping me. Welcome to, I think it's the 6th video. I'm starting to lose count, in the same way that I'm losing count of how old I am. But yeah, I think this is the 6th video in the series Old Photos of Scotland, and today we're looking at transport. The first photo that I'm going to show you was taken from round about just this spot here. It was actually taken on the wooden jetty, but it's closed off, it's too dangerous, the whole thing's doing its best to collapse. But you can still see the arch there that you'll see shortly, the arch that hung over the steps leading down to the small passenger ferry terminal. And as you look at this image just now, while in essence the view is much the same, there are a number of changes that it's just, if you look closely, you'll spot. You will see, for example, that the cranes in the photo are no longer there. They were beside Fairfield Shipyard. It's no longer Fairfield Shipyard, the cranes aren't there, but it is thankfully still a shipyard, just without those cranes. You'll also see, if you look closely at the photo that's coming up, that the huge red brick Meadowside granary in Whiteinch area, way in the distance. Again, it's no longer there, although even if it was there, you wouldn't be able to see it because of the more modern structures in the way. Excuse me. You will also see that alongside the riverside here, warehouses, and they have gone as well. There's a huge change in the side of the River Clyde these days. But thankfully we do have, as I think you can perhaps see way in the distance now, beside the tall ship, Glasgow's Riverside Museum, which is quite aptly concerned with transport. And I highly recommend it as a stop when you visit Glasgow. So without further ado, let's just get cracking with the first photo.
A small passenger ferry arriving right here at Kelvinhaw Wharf in 1979. The ferry has just travelled across the River Clyde in Glasgow from the terminal at the end of what used to be Highland Lane by Govan Graving Docks. You can see the shipyard cranes, the granary and the warehouses, all gone. But, of course, we now have the Riverside Transport Museum, where the River Kelvin meets the River Clyde. As a small boy, I remember these ferries. To get on and off, you had to walk over a plank of wood, without a safety harness. Some Clyde ferries lasted until the early 1980s, but with the exception of the more modern passenger ferry at Renfrew, they too have now all gone. Another Glasgow passenger ferry, at this time the Clyde Street Ferry in 1966, a year before it ceased operation. This ferry ran from Anderson Quay, right where the Kingston Bridge now stands, across to Springfield Quay by Kingston Dock on the south bank of the river. In the hazy distance you can just make out the Finison crane, thankfully still standing, along with ships berthed at Anderson Quay and Lansfield Quay on the north bank of the river. Yet another Glasgow ferry, but not one that just trundled back and forth across the River Clyde. This is a Clutha, a ship that took passengers on a voyage from one part of the river to another, but generally within the area of Glasgow Harbour. The photo probably dates to the late 19th century and is interesting because it shows the point where the River Kelvin meets the River Clyde. you can see a boat berthed at the Meadowside shipbuilding yard on the left, the tower of Glasgow University way in the distance, and a ship under construction in the Point House shipbuilding yard, right where the Riverside Museum stands today. You can also see the wharf or landing stage for the Govan ferry. Leaving the River Clyde but remaining in the Partick area of Glasgow, this is Partick Railway Station around 1912. All these commuters look very well dressed, most of the men having bowler hats instead of bonnets. Partick must have been posh in the old days. Back then the station had waiting rooms and toilets. I don't think the modern station has toilets. These days commuters are expected to have a bladder capacity of about a gallon. Across the country to Edinburgh now, around 1890, and here we see the expansion of Edinburgh's Waverley Railway Station. You can see the castle and Scott Monument, which helps get your bearings, along with the balustrade of the previous North Bridge at the very bottom. But you can also see the Herculean excavation into bedrock and demolition of surrounding buildings, including the forerunner of today's Balmoral Hotel, that is going on to allow this grand Victorian palace of a station to be built. In the bottom left is a steam crane helping with the work. Folk waiting on a train in the booking hall of Edinburgh Waverley's railway station, sometime in the second half of the 20th century. It may not seem too obvious in the photo, but what they are sitting in was indeed a Victorian palace of a station. And was is a key word here. You can see the whole wonderful booking hall in all its glory in this photo dating to 1969. Just look at that wooden booking office. In addition to the booking office, there is a decorated glass ceiling dome and stunning mosaic flooring, seen in more detail here. Sadly, the wooden booking office was removed in 1970, and the mosaic floor was covered in bitumen to allow a lino floor to be laid. So all that now remains is that glass dome, a grand survivor in what must once have been the finest railway booking hall in the world. Railway station advertising at its very best. This is Aberdeen's main railway station, once called Joint Station, at an indeterminate date but probably sometime in the first half of the 20th century. I can't imagine that anything remains from this photo, as major redevelopment work took place in the 1970s and at other times. Back to Edinburgh's Waverley Railway Station now, and an interesting shot of Carlton Hill in Edinburgh around 1900. It's interesting for any number of reasons. We can see old train carriages on the east side of the station, and a very old steam engine. Look at the height of that chimney. It also shows buildings in the north back of Canongate, with the unmistakable vent attached to a brewery on the far right. We can also see the castly towers of Carlton Jail. A new train being lifted off a trailer in Govan's Princess Dock, ready for export on a ship bound for overseas sometime around the mid-20th century. The good old days, when we made trains in Springburn and had cranes big enough to lift them. This is Glasgow's underground maintenance depot in the 1950s, and another train is being lifted aloft by some hefty bit of kit. Glasgow's underground has changed much over the years, but at the end of the day you still have tunnels and trains emerging from them with a frightening roar and rumble. This photo shows a passenger buying a ticket from some newfangled ticket machine at Hillhead Underground Station in 1962. You could travel 3 stops for just a penny. Many things were just a penny in the old days, even caramels. Back then, Glasgow's underground stations weren't the bright, welcoming structures that we know today. As we can see here, some station entrances were little more than just another doorway in a tenement. This is Kelvin Bridge Underground Station entrance and ticket booth in 1962. The tenement still exists, and the doorway can still be seen today on the left of number 74, positioned at the foot of the steps with the ornate railings leading from Great Western Road to South Woodside Road, beside the modern glitzy station. These days we reckon cycling in big cities can be a dangerous activity, given the sheer volume of traffic on the roads. But it wasn't all plain sailing in the old days. This is Glasgow's Bath Street in the 1930s. The building on the right, 13 Bath Street, still stands. Always nice to leave big cities behind when you're on your bike. Here we have a chap and a couple of bicycles at Granton Castle, near the Firth of Forth in Edinburgh, probably in the early 20th century. Well, I couldn't talk about transport without mentioning a horse or two. Horses have played a major role in man's past. They have been by our side in many situations, transporting us, carts, trams, coal wagons, canal barges, and guns in past wars. It is estimated that 8 million horses, donkeys and mules died during the First World War, either in action or simply through exhaustion in extreme conditions. 8 million. Where would we be without them? This photo shows a horse and cart delivering a huge sack of something in Aberdeen's South Constitution Street in slippy, snowy conditions, probably around the early 20th century. And here's a couple of horses helping out with the laying of tram lines, possibly in the Liberton area of Edinburgh in 1922. Does anyone recognise the exact location? An old photo, possibly dating to the 1860s, showing a cross between a carriage and a bus, or omnibus to give it its full and proper title. The horse pulled this bus a fair distance across Glasgow, the vehicle being one of a fleet in the city owned by Andrew Menzies, each being decorated with the Menzies tartan. The bus is stopped on Sauchiehall Street at its junction with Kelvin Grove Street, and the building shown still exists. A hefty bit of engineering in the shape of a tram, and it needs 2 horses to pull it. It's August 1907, and this is apparently the last horse-drawn tram in Edinburgh prior to electrification. The tram is posing, for want of a better word, at Toll Cross. I wonder what happened to all the redundant horses. And here's the first electric tram linking Leith with Edinburgh, surrounded by crowds on Leith Walk in 1922. We're looking down Leith Walk, and I think that's Albert Street on the right. The curving corner building still exists. They stopped running trams in Edinburgh in 1956, and today work is ongoing, and has been for what feels like many years, to once again link Leith with Edinburgh with a new tram system. A wartime tram giving the public in Glasgow advice on food waste. It dates to the Second World War and speaks for itself. You might think trams were pretty safe, given that they were on rails and didn't seem to go too fast. But oh, how wrong you would be. It's 1929 in the Liberton area of Edinburgh, and this tram hasn't so much fallen over as crashed. Big time. And I think it's fair to say that sloping ground or a brae probably had a part to play in its demise. That, along with speed. Not really what you want to see first thing in the morning when looking out your bedroom window. It's 1956 and some folk are soaking up the very last tram ride in Edinburgh. They look decidedly happy, given that it would be another 70 years before trams returned, and they still haven't linked Leith with Edinburgh. My God, but what's taking them so long? In Glasgow, the last tram ran in 1962, which I was quite glad of. In Glasgow, the trams were called Shughleys, and many tram journeys ended with me staggering off, clutching my stomach and looking decidedly white. There's a heck of a lot going on in this photo. It's Market Street in Aberdeen, probably in the late 19th century. You can see regular horses and carriages or carts transporting people, coal and barrels. But there's also some children with wheelbarrows and a small boy pulling another boy on a... what the heck is that? The building on the right still exists, as will others. It's trams again, and workmen are laying tracks in the Liberton area of Edinburgh in 1922. That's quite a steep road, or brae, and it would surprise me not one jot if that previous tram crash took place on this hill. In the old days, cameras were something of a novelty, and a camera on a tripod often attracted a crowd. But some folk were suspicious of them. The devil's work, or something like that. Prime Minister William Gladstone clearly wasn't always enthralled with cameras, given that he's scowling out of that wee train thing. It's 1884, and a novelty electric railway at the International Forestry Exhibition in Edinburgh. Gladstone's facial expression is very much saying, "What is that bounder doing over there? Somebody shoot him." An unusual form of transport now, like a wee long bus thing. They were called a charabanc and were generally open-topped buses used largely for excursions and day tours. The first photo dates to 1913 and shows way too many people on board, and the second shows a trip to Lough Erne in the 1920s. You don't generally see open-top buses these days, which is a shame, but it's probably because of safety reasons. This coal lorry's no leaving this pit is very much the story here. It's 1985 and striking miners are trying to stop a lorry full of coal from leaving a pit or depot, presumably somewhere in Scotland. This was the last dying throes of an industry destroyed by Westminster governments. An early photo of wharves at South Alloa Harbour. It dates to around 1904. At that time, South Alloa had a pretty large timber yard, and you can clearly see stacks of timber. It is thought the timber arrived on ships that had originally been sent out with a cargo of coal. The imported timber could then be used, among other things, for pit props. As well as two sailing ships, you can see carts used to transport the timber around. We very rarely get to see the inside of those huge ships and liners, which makes this photo a bit special. It dates to 1911 and shows the smoking room on the SS Dorothy Haw. She was built and launched in Grangemouth that year and was a fine-looking ship. Today, you can see the upper part of another ship's smoking room from the SS Orontes in the Woodside Hotel in Aberdour. Back to Glasgow and another ferry, this time the vehicular and passenger ferry that ran between Renfrew and Yoker. The photo dates to 1975 and was taken by John R. Hume. It looks like it's about to leave the Renfrew side of the river. As a wee boy who grew up in Glasgow, I remember this ferry. Every journey from one side of the river to the other was a small nautical adventure. Sadly, it stopped running in 1984, and today there is just a passenger ferry at the location. Here we see a car and some passengers using that same Renfrew ferry, this time in 1967. Men going to and from their work. This final image shows 3 biplanes flying over the Forth Railway Bridge in the 1920s. It's not a real shot, more a piece of art, as the artist, Alfred Buckham, added the aircraft to the image. It is nonetheless a stunning image.
Well, I thought I'd end the video at this doorway, as you would have seen in one of the earlier photographs, once the entrance to Kelvin Bridge subway. And that entrance is so different to the modern station that sits just behind the camera. And when I look at this, I do wonder what's behind this door now. You know, is that little wooden ticket booth still there? And is that woman still standing waiting to buy her ticket? I hope you've enjoyed looking at these photographs just as much as I have. And of course, don't forget that you can see all sorts of things to do with transport in Glasgow's magnificent Riverside Museum.